Let me just.
Yep. So I will leave the floor to you, Joseph. I'm already recording the session, so if you guys like need me to do something, utaniambia too. But
Just
now hand it over to Joseph. So you guys enjoy.
okay. So I guess we can start by looking at a broader picture of React, like just for the sake of those that joined recently, like in terms of what is it, like the concepts that you need to be familiar with to say that you know some React, and maybe like a sort of a roadmap of on what the concepts, the most important concepts that you're supposed to learn about, yeah, the library itself. After that, maybe we'll have a small talk about hooks then. The three hooks that we've covered, like, yeah, the three hooks that we've covered. And then you guys are free to ask a question and interject whenever you have a question. Yeah, let me share my screen. I have a bit of a cold, so if I sneeze, sorry in advance. Can you see the screen? Let's do somewhere where we can get like a whiteboard just to jot out stuff. It's the dark mode. Okay, let's just create. Um, okay, so let's start with what is React. So, React is actually a library. Yeah, it's a library. I can't seem to find where I create a new Control N. Hey, that's a new window. Yeah, React. Too large. I don't extra large like that. So we have React here. What is React? So React is basically a library that you can use to create user interfaces. Library used to create UI. So there are many ways of creating UI. You can use a library like React. You can use other frameworks for doing like front-end web development. One of the most popular before React was jQuery. And then we also have Vue. We also have Svelte. We also have Angular. So yeah, they fall in the same category. But now React is not a framework. React is a library. And a core reason as to why React is not really considered a framework, even though like you'll hear people calling it a framework because it basically does most of the things that frameworks do, is because React itself does not have a few things that like a full-fledged framework would have. A good example of the stuff that it doesn't have is routing. So let's list out key concepts here. Key concepts. Before we come to routing, let's just look at the key concepts from the very, very beginning to the most advanced. So, one of the most important concepts that you have to understand when you're learning React is the concept of components. Components. Because basically, when you're thinking in React, you're thinking in components. Like that is one of the most significant and key thing that you have to remember about React. When you're working in React, a particular piece of UI, you have to think of it as in terms of components. So assuming you have like example navbar here, not even a navbar, maybe a hero, like a hero section, and then within that hero section, maybe you have an image here, and then you have text. You also have text here. So whatever UI you are trying to create, it will always have like small things within the UI that can be broken down into components. So basically, when you're looking at a design, for example, this like a simple design here, you have to think of this design in terms of components, because that's basically the React way. For example, in the example of this particular design, we can decompose this thing into very small and minute components. So one very obvious component that we can see here, let's start top down, is the card. The card itself, the whole thing is a component. So let's just try to break it down. The card itself is a component. The whole card by itself is a component. And then within the card we have this image, and then we have this sort of list here. So this image can be a component by itself. And then these list items here, as you can see, they are basically the same. So we can have a component for them also, like list items. So in the very like smallest, very minute level of React, you have to think of everything when you're coming across a design as a component. So that's our first key concept. The second key concept. So these components have to share. They have to share data. They have to share data. Applications have data. Any application will have data. User information is data. Maybe, for example, when I switched to dark mode here, that's a piece of data that have changed within this application. So maybe we have very many pieces of UI that need data, and they need to share data like between them. And that's where the concept of props comes in. So in order to share data between different components, in this case we have three components here: the card, the image, and the list items. We have something called props and state. So props is in full is properties. And then we'll also talk about state because it's also related to data. And also we can think of it as a reactive values. So for props or properties, like you can think of props like the same way you'd think of attributes in HTML. In HTML, you have something called an attribute. Like each tag has an attribute. For example, the image tag has the source attribute. So props and attributes are more or less the same, in that you pass them to, for the attributes, you pass them to like custom HTML elements to modify the behavior of that element. But for props, you basically use it to share state between components. For example, in the case of this card component here, if I was doing like a fetch, for example, in this card component, like fetching data here on the card itself, like on the very first here component. And I want to share that, for example, the data comes back with an image, and I want to share that image with my second component. How do I do that? Using like React, using React. So the way to do that is using props, aka properties. And the same way you have like an image there, as I've just said, in HTML, you have this src and you also have alt. So basically these are attributes, and you can think of these attributes in the same light, like this, the way we have attributes for HTML elements, we have now props for React. So assuming we had created a card component, it would be like this, and it's a convention. Like it's a convention, you have it has to start with a capital letter so as to differentiate between the components and the HTML elements. So for this card, assuming I wanted to share an image after fetching data down, I will come maybe and add a prop. As you can see, it's basically just an attribute. Then image, and then I will just specify it inside here, whatever the image is. So that is props. We use props to share data between components. And then now we also have something called state. So state, the data that you want to share between components, that data is what is called state. And basically, React keeps track of any value that you define as a piece of state using the useState hook, so that whenever that value changes, React will know to re-render the component, so that like you display the most up-to-date information to your user. So these are the three key concepts that you need to first master in React before moving on to anything else. The concept of components, whereby you're sort of like subdividing your UI into smaller pieces of UI. Like a whole website will be formed by very, very many small components that you come and put together to form the big application. So components will come together maybe and form a page, then pages will form the application. So after knowing these three things and like having a good grasp of what we have about that, the next step will be to now talk about hooks, because even the thing that you'll use here as a bit of, as like the thing that you'll use to define state is a hook. So the next thing that you need to learn is hooks. Like this is it's actually in order. Yeah, I guess I wanted to shrink this thing to get more space. Yeah, at least to have a bit of space. Can you guys still see me? Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, let's continue. So the next concept that after mastering the first three, these three are the most paramount. So the next concept is hooks. What are hooks? And the way like we discussed earlier in that of the earlier React class, most of these names basically describe what these things do. In the case of hooks, It basically describes like getting a certain functionality that was previously not available in functional components. So the story of hooks, previously React was object oriented, whereby components were defined using classes. Okay. So previously, components were defined using classes. And these class based, they were called class based components. They had like sort of inbuilt like functionality for state and inbuilt functionality for handling the component life cycles. For example, doing something when the component mounts, doing something when the component updates, and doing something maybe when the component unmounts. So before that, we also had the functional components. But now you would not use functional components to define any piece of UI that required to use state. But now, yeah, the React team decided now to move from object-oriented OOP, which is these classes, now to functional programming, what we currently have in as the like main way of doing React currently. So now they, because like the, for example, state and effects were built into class components. So that's where this name hook came from. Basically, you are trying to access functionality that was only previously in class-based components using now functional components. That's where this word hook came from. And then these hooks, we also have conventions for hooks. Hooks are also very pretty important. We can talk about a few of the conventions that we have when you're using hooks. The first one is naming. You'll see that there's this use for any hook built into React and even hooks built into other libraries. You'll always find this thing use. If you want to create even your own custom hook, you have to adhere to the naming convention by giving it something used, then the verb that describes that hook. For example, use state. Let's first list out, actually, let's list out the conventions here. The naming, we call it use. And then let's also talk about the roles of hooks. These are things that you have to know about hooks. Roles of hooks. So apart from this naming convention, which is also pretty easy to like get and use in your day to day, you also have these rules of hooks. It's also very important to understand them so that you know when, like which situations you can use a hook and which situations, like if you use the hook, it will like be breaking the rules. These rules, there are three. The first one, we talked about them recently. You can only use hooks in functional components. This thing is almost going out. Let's move it. Okay, so you can only use hooks in functional components. And then the second rule is you cannot use hooks inside conditionals. Hooks cannot be conditional. Hooks cannot be conditional. Conditional in this sense is like maybe saying if, and then your condition, and then inside that block, you're saying set state. Let's just look at maybe how that would look. Like for example, you cannot do this when you want to set state. like if my condition, and then now you put your like you cannot use hooks like this. Like we put now your use effect inside here. For example, use effect. It cannot be used conditionally because if this condition is false, this hook will not run. So there's nothing like that. Hooks have to be they can't be done conditionally. That's basically what that rule stipulates. But yeah, you can use hooks in functional components and custom hooks. There's another thing here. So today we don't want to code. We just want to talk about React and how to master it. Yeah. So the third rule is you have to define your hooks at the top level. At the top level of your function. The top level of your function. Null component. Yeah. So let's make this a bit smaller. Create more space. Yeah. So that's is it fourth? That is the fourth thing that you have to know. Let's list out the hooks that come built into React. I can list them here. You can actually go down here. So React comes with a number of inbuilt hooks. Built-in hooks. React comes with a number of built-in hooks. The first one is the one that you use if you want to define state, which is use state. The second one is the one that you use if you want to do a side effect within a component. So what is a side effect? Let's just expand this. Reactive variables. In this case, these reactive variables will re-render the component when they change. You have use effect. Managing side effects. So React sort of lives in its own world, sort of like in isolation. And like if you want to do something that is outside the scope of React, for example, you want to fetch data from a remote server, or you want to manipulate the DOM directly, that is also a side effect. Or you want to set a timeout, like set timeout is a global function. You want to set an interval. Set interval is a global function. Maybe you want to add an event listener, like you want to go the old school JavaScript way. That is a side effect. The hook that you use so that React knows what is happening, so that you fill React in, is use effect. It's used to manage side effects and to connect to external systems such as remote servers and anything that is outside the scope of React that React does not know of. So that is the use effect. The third hook that we talked about was use context. They're all functions. These are just functions. They're just functions. They're nothing special. Use state is a function that returns an array. Use effect doesn't return anything. And then use context, it will return your context. They're just functions. There's nothing like strange to them. There's nothing magical to them. Just ordinary JavaScript functions with a bit of React sprinkled in. So when you're using props, there's a problem that comes up. It's called prop drilling. Let's just first explain what prop drilling is. When you're using these props, this one, props, to share data between components, there is something called a prop drilling that you'll come across, because props can only go one direction. Like if I, for example, in this component here, this sample component, if I had data in this card that I want to share with the image, I can only do it downwards from the parent, which is in this case is the card, to the child, which in this case is the image. Props can only be passed from the parent to the child, from parent components to children components. So if like I have nested components, for example, I had maybe additional components within the image component. Like if I have nested components, I get that problem whereby I have to manually drill props from one component to the next, to the next, to the next, until where it's being used. Because basically there's no, like apart from props, there's one other way of doing state management. So props is basically used to share data, but it has a weakness. It can lead to prop drilling, and prop drilling will make your code very, very hard to. Actually, I have a certain application. Will I be able to find it? That it will be a perfect showcase of prop drilling, because I don't want to code today. Let me just try to look for it. So basically, use context is the hook that was created to solve the problem of prop drilling, whereby it enables you to easily share data between components. Do I have internet? Okay. So I was lazy. I didn't want to use global state management here. It's just an application that I wrote a while back, but it showcases that issue. Like your code will not be maintainable if you depend on prop drilling to share state between components. Yeah. So in the case of just here, this is the perfect showcase for that problem. You can see I have a few components. I have navbar here. I have like a quotes form. This was an application for creating quotes, and I have quotes here. So you see this whole thing here, this whole block. This is passing down props from this app. We're currently in app.jsx, which is our parent now. We're sharing this data, this state that is here, to our child components, which in this case is quote forms and quotes. So if I go to maybe this quotes, you'll see I'm again now passing again props down again. So if I go here, then quotes, internet is quite slow. Then to this one, you'll find that again, once more, I have another component here, the quote component. And again, there are some props that I'm getting on the quotes here that I passed down from the app, that I'm again now passing again down to this quote. So as you can see, if I had another component within quote, the same thing. If I had another component within that, the same thing. So that is what you're calling prop drilling. And the hook that was invented, or rather created, to solve that problem is the use context hook. Created to enable easier sharing of data between components. As we've already looked at the issue, this problem of passing down props. Sometimes even the props that are coming to this component will not even be used here. They will not be used within this component, but I again have to pass them down to the component that will use them. If I had another one, I'd pass them down again. So if I have many components, automatically the code is not maintainable, the code is not readable. Even if you come and look at it, you don't even know what's happening. But now there's a better way of doing it. And this better way is what we are calling use context. Okay, let's come back here. So yeah, that's the use context. So far we've only covered actually so far more or less we've only covered these concepts. The concept of props in this particular like mentorship cohort. We've covered components, props, state, and now we are currently on hooks. And we've covered these 3 hooks. So basically, anyone that was not caught up, we've already done sort of like a catch-up session on what we've done. But we're going to look at a few more that we haven't done, but that we will do later on. So they might not make sense right now, but they will make sense. But it's good just to know. I just want to do like a sort of overall view of what you need to know. At least consider yourself maybe like a junior developer in React or something. So we also have useref. Useref, it's used to get like it's a hook that you can use like as an escape hatch. We have some instances like whereby, for example, like your logic requires accessing a DOM node. Or maybe having a value that is not reactive, like a value that can change without rendering the component. A good example of a value that you would want to change and not render the component will be maybe a timer or an interval. You can basically use useref to define that timer or an interval that will change. For example, if it's a timer, if it goes from 10 to 9 to 8 to 7 to 6 up to 0, it will not be causing re-renders on the application because refs do not cause re-renders. So that is one of the uses. One of the uses, create values that will not result in a re-render. This has 2 uses, so maybe we can do like that. It will not cause a re-render. And if anyone has a question, you can just interject and ask. But we'll also have a Q&A at the very end. So refs you can use them to create values that will not cause re-renders. And you can also use them to access DOM nodes. DOM is document object model. So if you know JavaScript, you already know about the DOM. Basically the interface that JavaScript uses if you like to manipulate browser APIs. It is DOM, document object model. Access DOM nodes. A good example of this would be if you want to programmatically put focus on an input. For example, I have maybe sign up to my newsletter, something like that, like a form that I want someone to input something in. I can use useref to get a ref to that input. And then once you get the ref to that input, you'll basically get all the methods that will be available if you are using maybe JavaScript methods to access the node. For example, document.querySelector or document.getElementById. So basically, that's what accessing a DOM node is. If you were to do it in vanilla JS, you would use things like query selector and get element by ID. I guess you guys, I'm sure you guys are familiar with these two methods that are on the document object. So if you want to do the same in React, you want to use a query selector, you'll use useref to get a reference to that DOM node. And then basically you can do something to that DOM node, maybe in your component mounts or whatever. A good example will be drawing focus to an input on the component mounts by having a reference to the input and just calling the input has a something called focus, and maybe just using that to programmatically draw focus to that input, so that when someone just loads your component, they can just start typing that input without trying to going and then clicking on the input. So that might sound a bit abstract, but we haven't covered this hook, so we'll still cover it. So let's go on to the next one. So these ones are the ones that you want to know. These are the most crucial ones that you'll need every day. This useref, actually, people are advised to use it sparingly, because you're basically, it's an escape hatch from React. If you want to do the old ways of JavaScript, you'll need something to like escape React land. You can call it React land. So useref is your hook in case of that, but use it sparingly. Let React manage the state. Let React manage the re-renders and all that. So as a beginner, you should be an expert in these three. But we'll mention other three. There are many, but we'll mention another there's two that you will need. You might need, not you will need. The first one is use memo. Use memo. And as you can see, the names are descriptive of what these hooks do. State, use state, like the state of the application. And effect, aside effect, use effect. Context, it's a bit different for that. Share data between components without prop drilling. Useref, get a reference to a DOM node. The same thing that you will do. Those are fancy words. Get a reference to a DOM node, but it's basically the same thing that you will do with document dot that. For example, if I had like an input, I could do like this input. I'm getting a reference to the input. This is how we do it in JavaScript. But now in React, the same thing can be done using useref, and you'll get all the properties that you'd get with this, and we'll look at that when you reach that. So sorry about that. The next one is use memo. Use memo. You might need it if you see that your application is the performance is you don't have a good performance in your application. We have a few hooks that you can use for performance, to improve the performance of your components. The first one is use memo. Use memo. We have a concept called memoization. Memoization in computer science. Memoization. What is to memoize? So basically, if you have an expensive function, what is an expensive function? I have maybe 10,000 products in my DB, and I have like maybe a filter on those products, or maybe I'm doing a sort on those products on the component mounts. If I have a very large list, that can be considered an expensive function, one that might take like it's a slow function that might cause performance issues. So this expensive function that results in a value, I can use memo to memoize it. So by memoizing, I'll basically do the calculation, the expensive calculation once on the component mounts. After I do that expensive calculation on the component mounts that one time, if nothing in the dependencies of my use memo change, even if the component re-renders, that expensive calculation will not be done again. So as you can see, that automatically gives you a performance boost, because you'll only get that lag once when the component mounts. And then once that operation completes, for example, a sort is a very expensive operation if you have a very huge array, and it also mutates the array. Like it might take like you might get a spinner for a few seconds while that sort is doing. But when you re-render that component again, when you mount it again, if you are using use memo to memorize that value, that results from that expensive calculation, the component will not re-render. So you will not perform that expensive calculation each and every time that your component re-renders. It will run only once. So basically, use memo, use effect, and the one that we're going to look at next, they all have something called a dependency array. They all have something called a dependency array, whereby like it has the dependencies that the hook depends on, and when the dependencies change, the hook runs. So use memo, use effect, and use callback. All of them have a dependency array, and when the dependencies change, that is when the calculation, in this case the expensive calculation, will be done again. Yeah, so this use callback, use ref, and use memo. They're a bit advanced hooks, but it's actually nice to know what they do. And just in case you get that like a performance bottleneck, you definitely know what to do. And I've given you a very good example of an expensive calculation. Is to memorize memo. I'm sure that's the spelling memorize. As you can see, the definition is to store the result of a computation so that it can be subsequently retrieved without repeating the computation. Exactly what we have described to you guys. You store the results of that computation so that when your component renders, in this case, it's an expensive computation, one that will cause your app to have a spinner for a few seconds. You don't want to always perform that particular calculation every time the component renders, because React is all about rendering the component to change values and to update the UI. So there are some instances whereby if you have maybe like as we've talked about sorting, if you have an expensive calculation that results in a value, you can memorize that results of that computation using use memo. That definition was actually on point. The results of an expensive computation, e.g., sorting a huge list. You can just say array dot sort on a huge list. Then we have use callback. Use callback is more or less like use memo, but now it's used to memorize functions. Used to memorize functions. As you can see, callback, use callback. As you know, callbacks are just functions. So the names are just descriptive of what the hook actually does. So it's used to memorize functions. As you know, we have, we have something called passing by reference and passing by value. Go a bit in the computer science direction. Pass by reference, pass by value. So basically, pass by reference is whereby like a variable Like, for example, in this case, React will look at the reference to that variable. And then pass by value is whereby you're looking at the value itself. Let's look at an example. If you define an object, like, let's just do this here so that we see the difference. If you define an object like this, if you say A5, then you do this, then you define another one, A5. What will be the result of this? Assuming it's a conditional, can someone just give me an answer so that I know you're still together? What will be the results of this? It's an object with a property A, which is equals to 5, and we're saying is equals to another object, a very similar object with A, again, is equals to 5. Will this give me true or false?
False.
Yeah, that's Evans. Evans, that's your.
Albert.
No, that's me. I don't
No,
know.
Albert. Yeah, Albert. Give a reason to that. Why will it give you false? Why will it give you false? Yet they're the same. Aren't they the same object?
Yeah, they're. I'd not say they're the same objects. They are two different objects, but they look the same. So what I believe JavaScript does is you're accessing those two values by their reference, and as such, they are stored in two different locations in memory.
Very good. Very, very good. Very good. That is passed by reference. In very, very simple terms, as Albert has put it. These two objects point to two different memory locations. Even if they're the same, they're not the same. They're not the same in terms of reference. In this sense, reference is the memory location where you're storing. As you know, it's just a computer with a hard disk, with an OS and all that. If you create an object, it has to be held somewhere in memory. So if you create two objects like this and try to see whether they are equal, it will tell you false, because as Albert has clearly said, these two objects are pointing to two different locations in memory. And then now we have pass by value. If I had maybe this, would I get a true or false for this one? Anyone?
Yeah, you'd get a true value.
I get a true, right? Why? What is the reason as to I will get true for this?
This is because JavaScript is comparing the it's called the values of these two variables.
Exactly. So, as opposed to pass by reference, thanks for that. Actually, as you've heard, if you're dealing with a bit of a complex data structure, for example, an array, an object, a set, a map, something that is not primitive, those are passed by reference. A JavaScript or React or TypeScript or whatever will look at the reference of that object when you're trying to do certain like things like this one. But primitives, booleans, numbers, strings, they are passed by value. Basically, this will result to true because they're basically the same value. This one will return false because basically they are not the same value, because each one is pointing to a different location in memory. So, to segue from that, use for React, whenever a component renders and you have a function, functions are passed by reference in React. So React will see that it will recreate that function when the component renders. And again, you might have an expensive function that you don't want to be recreated every time the component renders. What will you reach out for? You'll reach out for the use callback hook, which will memorize your function so that like React more or less gets like a single reference to that function. And in case nothing changes, the reference stays the same, even if the component renders. That is use callback in very, very short terms, because apparently we are out of time. So these ones, as I've said, from useref going downwards, we'll cover them again. I just wanted to mention them, and just in case you want to learn them on your own, it will be a little bit more easier for you to know what they do. And as I've said again, these are actually sort of interview-like questions. If I ask, actually, let me just ask, just to see whether you guys are following. Out of all these hooks, what does useState return? Actually, quick fire answers. What does useState return? Because we've just talked about it right now and we're out of time, and I want to talk about a few more things. useState, just someone tell us, what does it return? Just what it returns. Then we move to the next one.
It returns two values, a state and a function, which the function is used to update the state.
It returns an array.
Exactly. It returns an array that has two values. Thanks for the correction, Albert. And thanks, that's Evans. Thanks, Evans. I hope I'm getting that right. useState returns an array, and that array has two things in it: the value itself and the setter function that will set it. useEffect. What does a useEffect return? What does useEffect return?
Nothing.
useEffect does not return anything because it's basically used to manage side effects. For side effects, you don't really need something to be returned. useContext. What does it return?
Your context.
Your context. In this case, what is the context? What is this context that we're talking about?
I think it could either be an object or an array, depending on what you are passing.
Like what is it? Not the data type. What is this context? If I told you to define it.
It's a global state.
It's something that you want to share across multiple components globally, right? Yeah. Nice. At least you guys are paying attention. What does the useref hook? What do you use the useref hook for? Why would you need a useref hook? Anyone? Someone that hasn't spoken. Ruben. That's Ruben. Ruben, go ahead.
But let me go. So the useref, you use it when you want to perform some DOM manipulative tasks. Like you want to manipulate an element, HTML element.
You want to access it directly, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. And then we have three hooks that take a dependency array. Someone to name those three hooks, because I've already talked about them. Three hooks take a dependency array. In this case, the dependency array is the array that has like stuff that when that stuff changes, I want this hook to run again. What are the three hooks? Maybe you can just mention one and then someone else mentions another one. Mambo. useEffect. Alan, thanks for that. Mambo.
So I was going to say useEffect and initial same one.
The next one.
Use callback.
Use callback, yeah.
Yeah, use callback. And the last one?
Use memo.
Use memo. That's Eunice. Yeah, thanks all for that. At least you guys are following. So, what is memoization? It's a very fancy word that you can use to impress your girlfriend/boyfriend. What is memoization? What is memoization? If I tell you, like, I want to memorize this value, look at how complicated that word is. What am I talking about? anyone.
So if I've understood it correctly,
Mm-hmm.
memorization is basically storing the results of a computation
Mm-hmm.
in memory so that we can access the results instead of running the computation over and over and over again.
Exactly, which might result in a performance bottleneck.
Performance issue.
Exactly, very nice. So the three hooks that we've talked about last, they are used depending on your circumstances. Whether you're facing like bottlenecks, performance bottlenecks, you're trying to render like sort a list of 10,000 elements or something, you might have to reach for one of these, use memo or use callback. Okay, so at least we've looked at the key hooks. What else can we talk about? Yeah, key concepts, just a recap: components, props, and state. Hooks. We've actually spent a lot of time on hooks, as you've seen. It's very important. We've also talked about passing by reference versus passing by value, which is also important. Just shrink it down. And then now let's talk about, let's just talk about a few other things that you might need. React, as we talked about, it's a library. It's not a complete framework. Basically, a complete framework will come with solutions for routing, solutions sometimes for data fetching, like and all that. React is not opinionated. It doesn't enforce strict opinions on you. You're basically free to do whatever you want as long as you're abiding to the rules of React. And that's why we have now frameworks of React. Let's talk about React frameworks. Now, let's now move out of the React sphere and talk about a few tools and components that you might need now to make your development experience now all round, because React lacks a few things. These are just bonuses that you must, like, if you want to be a good React developer that is marketable, that you can easily land a job, you also need to be familiar with these concepts. So one of the most important concepts is routing. Routing. So what is routing? All of you are familiar with HTML. In HTML, we have the A tag, and then the A tag takes an attribute called href. href, sorry about that. Href. The href is used to navigate you between different. For example, if I have an about page, I have a home page, I have a services page, I can use a href to link from one page to another. Like I can have an about.html, I can have an index.html, I can have whatever. But in React is a single page. In React, you're basically building SPAs, single page applications. And single page applications have only one HTML document. In this case, the only one index.html. I wish I hadn't closed that. Is it? You can just, before it opens, like basically it has only one index.html. React does the routing programmatically, and React itself does not have a routing solution. So what are the routing solution? Because all applications they probably require routing. If you're doing whatever application, you will need to change from one page to the other. So in the routing, we have two tools that you can use and that you have to know. React Router DOM. It's called React Router DOM. That you can use. This is the most popular. This is the most popular routing solution for React. But we also have Turnstack. I guess most of you know about the Turnstack React query. Turnstack, I don't know the name of this router. Turnstack router. Is it called Turnstack router? Let's check. That Tanner, I think it's called Tanner Linsley. He also has a routing solution, and as if you've used the React query, you know that he has pretty awesome tools. So you have these two options, but as you've seen, even this Turnstack router is still in beta. There are others, but in React, focus on React router, because this is what you'll basically find in most applications that are doing client-side routing. This is routing. One of the key thing that React does not give you, but that you can get, that you have to learn how to do using an external library. The next one, it's already 7. We'll go a bit fast and then have like a few Q&As, and then just call it a day. The next one, data fetching / caching. So in React, if you want to do data fetching, you use data fetching. Basically, you're interacting with an external system. And as we talked about external systems and managing side effects, you'll reach for each hook, the use effect hook. That is like sort of a hacky way of doing data fetching in React. But if you want a tool to give you both fetching and caching, so fetching is getting the data, and then caching is storing that data for a while before, like basically if I do the first fetch, I don't need to like do another fetch immediately in case maybe the component renders or something. So that data is cached. You can think of caching the same way that we've been thinking about memoization. Okay, so if you want like a comprehensive data fetching tool that also does caching for you, you have another Turnstack tool for that. It used to be called Turnstack. It was React Query before, but I guess right now it's Turnstack React Query or something. I hope that is going to be as it's React Query. Yeah, it's Turnstack React Query. As you can see, it's from there. Or Turnstack Query from this, like more or less the same person. It renamed it from React Query to Turnstack Query because he wants it to be framework agnostic, in that you can use it with any framework, and as the name sort of might sort of imply that you can only use it with React, but you can use it with Vue probably, and Solid, and Svelte and all that, or something of that sort is in the works. We have another one. We have other ones. It's called SWR. These are sort of smaller ones. And then we have RTK query. These are more or less data fetching / caching mechanisms. We have many more, but I'd advise you to either focus on Turnstack query or RTK query. But basically, this is Redux Toolkit query, like that. Because yeah, you can also now also move to Redux as it's more or less the same tool. If you like Redux and how it does stuff, you can reach for Redux Toolkit query or RTK query. Yeah, so I forgot another hook here. Actually, that one is also essential. Let's just add it here real quick, and then you guys will have a homework to go and investigate what it does. More will tell us. It's called use reduce. It just popped into my mind. Homework. What it does. Use reducer. Go and find out what it does, and you'll tell me tomorrow. used to memorize functions. Okay. Yeah, these four actually. Let me correct what I said earlier. These four: use state, use reducer, use effect, use context. Those ones are the ones that you want to focus on as a junior React developer. So as we said React is not a framework. Just a small recap. It's a UI library. So we also have other solutions that are coming to sort of fill in the gaps that React has. These are the two that you might need to be familiar with first. And then, actually, the first one should have been global state management, but we're going to put it as third or three. But more, just think, actually, it should just be first. As I show you my application that I was too lazy to write in the proper way, prop drilling can be a very, very messy thing. So you might have to reach for a tool that will help you to do global state management. And luckily, we've already looked at one of those tools. This is sort of the inbuilt solution. The next one, Redux. Redux used to be pretty verbose and pretty hard to work with before. But yeah, it has received a ton of updates. And the current Redux is actually, I actually love Redux, I'd say that. It's pretty easy to use. But you can have a few other options because most people say that Redux is overkill. You have many tools in this state management space. Some of them that come to mind right now with this. Zustand and Jotai are also libraries for doing state management. We also have another one called Mobex, but yeah, you don't need to really focus on the small ones. I'd recommend out of all these ones, you should know context and maybe Redux. But Redux sometimes, depending on the size of your application, it might be overkill. So it's good to have options. Yeah, what else can we talk about? Yeah. So, yeah, that's someone has a question. While we finish up now.
Joseph,
Yes.
yeah, on routing, people are using Next.js also because it has a file routing system by default.
Let me talk about meta frameworks then. You have a question about it?
No, I just wanted you to
Maybe mention.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, because routing is complex.
Yeah, exactly. So we also have nowadays they're called meta frameworks. Meta frameworks. Let's come in here. Like as you see, there's a lot of stuff to learn in React. Meta frameworks. Maybe I can also talk about user experience, animations. And then as the last thing, yeah, let's talk about the meta frameworks first. I started by telling you guys that React is not a framework because it's not complete. There are a lot of stuff that you have to do by yourself to. Can this thing be shared? Let's just find that out first. I'll find out so that I can share with you guys after the call. So, yeah, we have more complete solutions that you can use to create user interfaces with React, but they add some stuff on top of like other things. They might add routing, as you've had. Next.js has something called page-based routing, and then they can add a data fetching solution. Next.js has a few, like the old Next.js had something called like you had this thing is not coming to my. Let's just use is it server-side props? Use static props. All those were like sort of data fetching solutions for the Next.js 12. Right now we have server components. So we have meta frameworks that you'll be using React, but there are additional things that have been added to those frameworks to make your developer experience better. Some even have, like, for example, Next.js itself, it has an authentication solution, Nextauth. So basically, if you want to do auth, if you want to use providers like Google, Discord, Twitter, all that, you can use Nextauth. You see, it's a tool for auth, but it can only be used with Next.js. It will not work with React itself. Okay, so let's talk about meta frameworks, and then as we finish now, the first one we've already talked about it, Next.js, probably the most popular meta framework. We have another one. We have a few other ones. We have Gatsby. We have Remix. So Remix Run, this one and this one are probably, they're pretty more or less similar in terms of features. They've been borrowing, actually Next.js, the Next.js 13 has borrowed heavily from Remix. And yeah, so we have those two. And then we also have we have another one, Next.js, Remix, Gatsby. Yeah, let's talk about
Solid.js.
Solid is not a React thing. I'm talking about the ones that are for React. So for React, we have these three: Next.js, Remix, and Gatsby. But for other frameworks, as you've heard, we have Solid. We have there's one for Vue. I don't know. I'm not sure about the name for the one for Vue. We have SvelteKit for Svelte and others. But currently for React, we have these three. Next.js is the most popular, but Remix is also a pretty nice tool. Remix basically are the creators of this React Router DOM. So if you master React Router DOM, like the concepts and used for React in React Router DOM, repeat themselves in Remix, so it will be pretty easy to go to Remix. And Remix also has its own like routing solution. It has its own data fetching solution using actions and loaders. It has its own auth solutions. They have like if you want to maybe to do your own auth, they have a tool for that. React is not fully fledged, and that's why it's more or less just a library. And then we'll finish with animation. So yeah, the best tool for animation in React is called FrameMotion. FrameMotion. And so this one, if you want to create very good user experience using maybe opacity, fade-ins, whatever, like when a user does something on your UI, something happens in return. That's what we call user experience, UX. It's not only about UI. You also have UX, which most people neglect and don't really address. So you can go for FrameMotion. It's a very nice animations library for React. Maybe let's finish with styling. Styling and component libraries. So,
Yes, sir, can I have a question?
okay, go ahead.
On the animations part, are you familiar with GSAP and how good is it?
I'm familiar with GSAP, but it has a very, very steep learning curve.
Okay.
So I haven't actually used it in any project, but it's also very, very powerful in doing animations, and it also supports like Vanilla JS and all that. So it's actually very powerful, but I haven't used it that much, like in a serious project. I've used this framework for quite a while. You can't compare the developer experience of GSAP and Framer. Framer is basically pretty very like 10 times easier to use than GSAP.
But Framer is
So
for React, like it's React.
for
It's the
React
complete.
only, yeah. It's for React only. So for styling and component libraries, what options do you have to style your React applications? You have CSS. Actually, let's start with inline. You have inline style. Inline styles are pretty powerful in React. Use basically the style tag. Style, is it an attribute? Yeah, I think it's an attribute. So yeah, we're finishing up. Yeah, we have inline styles, which is very powerful if you want to do like conditional styling, because it's an object. You can basically use booleans there and conditions to change styles depending on a certain condition. You have CSS itself. We'll talk about a few that I like. You have Tailwind. I'm sure most of you know about Tailwind. All of these are styling. I've started with styling actually. Let's have to. It'll be done by 9:20. Then we have questions, and then we call it a day. By 7:20, I mean, not 9:20. So as you see, there's a lot of stuff. If you thought that like it's just easy to master these things within a few months, or someone tries to sell you like the dream that learn React in 100 days or learn whatever in 3 months or whatever, it's not possible. You have to take a lot of time, because apart from React itself, there are like a massive number of tools that you also have to be familiar with. So yeah, let's finish with the styling. We have many styling solutions, but I'll talk about the ones that I use and the ones that are a bit easy to use. So you can use Sass also. Let's add it down here. Let's CSS, and then what else? Let's add. Do we add one more? We have style components. We have many styling solutions, but I guess we can talk about those ones. And then now let me talk about component libraries. You know, when you're working in React, you don't have to create all your components. You don't have to create some components, because we have some libraries that already offer these components. And even if you try to create them yourself, like it will be very hard for you to do it in an accessible way. For example, to have the appropriate area attributes and all that. So you have component libraries that are here to make your life easier. Assuming I want to do a model right now, I want to create a model component. I could fumble my way through creating one using divs and whatever, and just making it work. But there are component libraries that, for example, have a model already created that I can install and basically just save time by using something that they've already created. So we have two categories of component libraries. One are the libraries that come with styles, like they're sort of opinionated. They give you styles. Like the components are already styled. I'll talk about three. Material UI, probably the most popular, the oldest. Chakra UI. We have many. In such spaces, you can't have only a few, but I'm just giving you the ones that I personally use and the ones that I think have a good developer experience. Because nowadays, it's not only about the users, it's also about the developer. You don't have to suffer like when creating that experience for the user. You can reach out for tools that also give you a sort of a good experience when you're also writing the code. So you have Material UI, you have Chakra UI, you have Mountain. I've personally used these three. My favorite is Mountain here. And then we have ones that this one are styled basically. And then we have unstyled. This thing has refused to be bigger. Okay, so yeah, I'll make it better before I share it. We also have unstyled component libraries. Basically, they give you UI primitives. They're called UI primitives that you use to create your own components. These UI primitives are not styled. You add your own styles. So this is the last thing that we'll talk about. And then if anyone has a question while we finish up, unstyled, you have Radix UI, probably my favorite. You have React Aria. So these ones give you primitives. Here we've gone back to components. Let's just look at Mountain. Assuming I wanted like a component whereby after someone does something, they can just click outside. Shit, where is this? Why is it not in dark mode though? Get started. The dark mode is not dark modding. So let's look at real quick because this one is actually messing up my eyes. Let's look at what is happening. My internet is a bit shaky, but basically, I may even still on this call. Okay, come on. I guess this thing is broken, but basically it gives you a bunch of. It doesn't even want to show us anything. Let's try that again. Then core. It's not opening, but it has like components that they have already been created, and that you can basically just import and use in your project. You don't have to create everything, as I said. Let's finish. Yeah. So as you can see, we have a lot of things. We have Flex, we have a grid, media query component, but I am interested in something like a model. Where is the model? We have very many components. Yes. Model. Basically, as you can see, it's already a component. It's already been created for you, and you just import it from Mountain. So instead of doing the model yourself, this is just a sample of it. You have everything. You also have even custom hooks to control the model and all that. So when you meet some sort of very, very complicated thing that you want to do, you don't have to do it yourself. You can look for a component library that has it already done. This, for example, is for this disclosure that appears down here. And yeah, for example, an overlay. If I wanted to create an overlay, you don't have to mess with like your positions absolutes and position relatives. You can use a component library. So this one has already styled components. And then we have ones that have UI primitives. They're not styled. A good example is this one, Radix UI. Yeah, way past time. Yeah, so I guess you can leave it at that. So I'll clean this thing up a bit and then I'll share it with you guys as a sort of maybe roadmap. so that like if you know these things, if you're familiar with all of the things that we've talked about today, you can go and apply for whichever like junior React role that you want to. I assure you, you'll be able to do it. First thing, props are components. First thing, what are components? How to create components, how to subdivide UI into components, how to use component libraries if you need some complicated component that you don't even know how to implement. Props, sharing data between components, more or less at like the attributes that you use to control different things in HTML. State, reactive values that when they change, the component renders. Hooks, like learn these things in this order: components, props, state, then the hooks. And as I told you, hooks, they're used to hook into functionality that was previously only in class-based components. There's a convention whereby you start the name of the hook with use state, use effect, use products, use Google Auth, use whatever, like use fetch. You can even create your own custom hooks. But just to be clear what this thing is, you have to specify use. For components, as we talked about, the best practice for them is like the name starts with a capital letter: card, image, list item. We have rules of hooks, very important rules of hooks. Use them in functional components and custom hooks. They cannot be conditional. You cannot use like if, then set state, if, then use memo, if, then use ref, if, then whatever. It has to be at the top level. Not nested inside the conditional, just at the very, very top level. Next, we've talked about the built-in hooks in React. Use state, it's for state. Use reducer, I don't know what it is for. That's your homework for today. Use effect, managing side effects and connecting to external systems or synchronizing with external systems like servers and anything that is not in the radar of React. Use ref, it's used to create a reference to a DOM node. We talked about that. We looked at how we do it in vanilla JS. Use memo and use callback. Memo is values, memo is functions. What is memoization? You don't want to run the computation over and over again. So basically, you are storing the results of an expensive operation, computation, or function, or whatever. A good example of an expensive computation would be array.sort. Then we talked about, this is just a recap, so that you guys can know what, like, if you have a question, you can just ask. Yeah, it's a library for creating UI, as example component. Then we talked about passing by reference versus passing by value. This is not a React concept. It's a computer science thing, and it's an important thing to know how variables, depending on their type, whether they're primitives or they're a bit more complex, like arrays and functions and objects and maps and sets and all that. Pass by value is basically, you're comparing value to value. Pass by reference, you're comparing memory locations, or locations in memory that are storing your particular variable, such as an object here. And then we talked about now additional stuff, because React is not a full-fledged framework with everything like defined, how you're supposed to do everything. Talked about what you need, all the additional libraries that you need to be aware of, that you need to master before you apply for that React role, so that at least you have a bit of an easy time when you eventually get that role. So here we've talked about context. I want to repeat about that. Redux is the OG and global set management solution for React. It was created by, I think, Dan Abramov or something. A very, very, like a god in the React world. So it's a very, very strong tool. And yeah, the newest version of it, which is called Redux Toolkit, even comes with a built-in data fetching / caching mechanism, which is called Redux Toolkit Query. And then we've talked about additional state management libraries like Zustand, Jota, and Mobex. Then we've talked about another key concept in React called routing. And the OG tool for routing is React Router. Actually, it's called React Router. But if you add the DOM one is specifically for React. And then the React Router, just like that, is specifically for React Native. React Native is the tool that you would want if you want to use React to create mobile applications. Go and look at React Native. Web. If you want to create cross-platform, they're called cross-platform mobile applications. Basically, the same code will compile to native code for Android and native code for iOS. That's what they call. React Native is for cross-platform mobile applications. And then React is for web applications. Yeah, so yeah, that's a small detour. So basically React is as powerful as that. You can use it even to create mobile apps using that React Native, and the APIs are not that different. Some of them will be pretty similar to what you'll be using in the React for web. And then finally, data fetching. What else? Now meta frameworks. Oh, data fetching or / caching. Apart from React Router and Transtack Router for routing, we have data fetching. Currently in React, you can do it with use effect and use state in combination with use state. But we have libraries for that give you also caching. They will also cache what you've fetched from the server, so that in the next, for example, fetch, if you don't want it to be refetched, it'll just be serving the cached data to your users. And then yeah, we have Transtack Query. Here I basically use all of them, but my favorite is definitely Transtack and React Query, Redux Toolkit Query, RTK Query. Then you have meta frameworks. For now, the frameworks for React: Next.js, the most popular one by Vercel, Remix Run. I actually like Remix more than Next.js, and because of the APIs that it exposes that are similar to this React Router DOM. So it basically has a very, very small learning curve if you already know about React Router DOM. You also have Gatsby. Gatsby used to be sort of popular before, but it fell out of favor. I think it was bought by is it Shopify or Netlify? I'm not sure. I think it's Netlify. Let's see whether it will make a comeback. But here, I basically go for Next.js first, and then maybe level up to Remix later on. Or after learning React Router, you can try out Remix. And then, yeah, I've also given you like an animation, one of the best animation libraries in React, Motion. And then we've talked about also styling, inline style, CSS, Tailwind, all this, This is Sass or SCSS. Used to be called Sass, like that. And then we have styled components. And then I've also talked about component libraries. In this case, we have the styled and the unstyled. And unstyled. So for the styled, we have these three: Material, Chakra, and Mountain. And then the unstyled, we have others, but my favorite ones are Radix UI and React Aria. Yeah, I've talked for quite some time. We've gone a bit past time, but I just wanted to get this thing out so that you guys sort of have like a roadmap. At least you know what you need to know. It's important to know what you don't know and also what you need to know. Yeah, so the floor is open for maybe 1 or 2 questions, and then the rest you can handle them tomorrow, or you can also just have like a comprehensive Q&A tomorrow because of the time. You guys decide.
The question I had when it comes to styling, so it's ideally possible to have like maybe I'm using Tailwind, and then I can add those component libraries like Mantin on top of Tailwind so as to get those components.
Definitely. Yes, definitely. You can still add Mantin, you can still add material or whichever, and then now so you can maybe just pick out specific components, the hard ones to do from Mantin and whatever, and then you can maybe create your own ones that maybe that are not that hard to create. It's quite possible. You can mix and match. Is there another one? Just can address it quickly.
Okay. Mine is not a question; it's a suggestion.
Okay.
Maybe some other time you can take us through the React life cycle so that it can help us understand more about
the component life cycle.
Yes.
Okay, let's just write up to-dos here. Not to-dos. And then we'll try to maybe address them properly. That's a nice suggestion. You're done, or you still had another?
Yeah, I'm done.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Maybe something that you want us to explain again, or yeah, because we've actually covered a lot of stuff. I'll try. This thing can be saved. I'll save it and share it, and I'll also clean it a bit so that like it's a bit easier to consume. But I know also maybe you guys have taken some notes just for reference. And also this video will be available later on, probably like after the session. I guess I can share this thing tomorrow, and then I can share it maybe today. You guys go through it and then come again with the questions tomorrow. I just clean it up and then share a link on the group. You guys can go through it and we can have a more comprehensive Q&A tomorrow. So don't be late tomorrow, so that we can start maybe at 7:15, have 15 minutes of Q&A, and then Ian can take over from that from 5:30, like from 5:15 to 5:30. We have the Q&A tomorrow after you guys have gone through this document. I've sort of digested like what we've talked about today. But this is basically the roadmap that you want to follow. First step, what's all the key concepts before even touching on these other things like libraries and whatever things to do in React. That will be my advice. If I think of something else, I'll talk about it tomorrow, because that's basically the end of my thinking capacity today. Yeah. Ian, did Ian come back? I think last time we had an issue because we ended the meeting without him. Like, we almost lost the recording. I hope that will not happen for people that did not join today.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay, man. We've gone quite past time, but yeah, we talked about what people need to know. As you've seen, it's quite a lot. So you guys have like an exciting task ahead of you, I can say that.
But it was very very interesting and informative. Nimeshinda nikitoka kwa hiyo meeting nyingine niruke hapa neno mnafanya nini? Like because of what I heard you guys talking about. So many resources that I did not even know about. You know, like I used to think that kama hiyo, what is it called? I know of Chakra, I know of Material, but I've never heard of Radix na React, Aria. Mantine. I've never heard of those ones. Very,
Yeah,
very
actually, this
interesting.
Mantine is actually pretty awesome. I
Yeah.
use it quite often. And also the concept of not doing everything yourself. You will not be able to fulfill the, like, for example, if you're creating a model, for example, what are they called? Accessibility. Like, for example, using a tab to open it, using enter to open it, something like that. You can reach for this React, the unstyled libraries, because they just give you the primitives with all the accessibility handled for you, and then you only do the styling. And you can also use the styled ones, but they are a bit more opinionated. So you might have to fight with the styles if you want to change them a bit. You also have
Yeah.
things like Bootstrap here, by the way, but yeah,
Yeah,
that's
Bootstrap.
more or less the old way of doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think this was, even though I've been dropping in and dropping out, I think it was very resourceful, like what you shared today.
Yeah, I thought we should do like a thorough look at what actually it's always important to know what you need to know, not only what you don't know, but what you need to know. Because if
Yeah.
you get a job without some of these concepts, you might really don't actually look for a job if you don't feel like I've mastered like the very, very basics. In this case, these are the basics that you need to know before. Maybe if you're working for your father or something, but if you're working for like a serious company, they might throw stuff your way that like you won't enjoy it. But if you know these things, maybe a year or something, you can go and
Yeah.
get a junior role and you'll shine
Yeah.
in it. It's just about time, actually. It's about a time. It's a
Yeah.
lot of stuff,
Yep.
but it can be learned if you have enough time.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
So umesikia from Joseph, unless you're working for your father, you need to know a lot.
Yeah, that's the sad reality, man. But actually, it's easier. These things used
Yep.
to be hard when you used to be doing it with classes and
Yeah.
like, yeah, it's the APIs, the APIs from React currently, inbuilt APIs, they're quite like not that easy compared to other frameworks to learn, but they can be learned a bit easier than what we used to have before.
Yeah.
So you guys are living in very, very good times.
Soft
But
life.
also these tools like React Core didn't exist.
Mm.
Like you used to fumble your way in creating like custom logic
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
caching and all that, which is very, very hard.
And like in terms of Kama, for example, like I think what is most interesting to me, obviously the component libraries, because they zikutolea kazi mingi basically. Like if you want to have a model or a carousel or any of those
Exactly.
things, they allow it to be
They
very, very
can
easy. So now my
add
question
this
is,
UI here.
is UI.
Mhm.
My question is in terms of like the overhead, like the cost that you have to pay to include those libraries in your project. So I have some experience with, for example, Chakra UI, and I remember when I used it, it sort of made my application very like
Laggy.
heavy. Ilikuwa kubwa yani. I don't know
That's
kama
now that is sort of the cost that you have to pay. But for Mountain is a bit more modular. Like nowadays they sort of try to split the library into a few smaller ones, so that maybe you can just like install what you need, so that you don't have to install everything. As you can see here, we have one for core. This one basically provides you with the core components. We also have this one for hooks. They also have quite a number of hooks that you can use for some stuff that you want to do. Like you can see, like if you want to install, you can basically choose what you want to be included. So that sort of mitigates the large bundle issue that comes with component libraries.
Yeah, that was my only issue with Chakra. I don't know kama they addressed it, because it does make your application a bit bigger. I don't know whether they do have tree shaking or not. Maybe I used like an older version, but that was something, because it took a performance hit. It went from like loading pretty fast to like a substantial difference because of your it's a
Yeah.
big library. So I think that's why people, it's still very popular, but
Yeah.
people are moving away from it.
Yeah, this styled ones will definitely come with a bit of bigger overhead. But Radix is actually pretty awesome because you actually install what you need, so you don't have that overhead for. Let's go to
Yeah.
the docs real quick for like
Mm.
having like some huge bundle or something.
Yeah, definitely check them out. Looks like even
As you can
the
see, the installation.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just specific to what you want to use.
Yeah.
So it sort of mitigates that issue.
Okay. Well.
Yeah, but that was fun. I've also sort of jogged my memory about this stuff. I hardly like sometimes you don't think of them that often, and they're pretty important to think about.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so you guys go and do that homework. You'll tell me what is this use reducer hook tomorrow, and then maybe I'll share this thing, and then we can have a more comprehensive Q&A after you've digested what we talked about today.
Okay. So, any question from anyone? Yeah. Well, from me ni kusema asante sana Joseph. I think that was like an awesome session. A lot of very informative resources today. Yeah.
Welcome.
Okay. Well, if no one has a question, I think we can end at that point. So I'll see you guys tomorrow. We'll continue with the same. So I think for most of this week, we'll just piggy bank on what we've done today. Yeah. So I guess we can meet tomorrow. Tomorrow I should be available now from tomorrow back at the end of the week. Yeah. But we'll take a page off of what Joseph did today. Yeah. So you guys enjoy your evening. Na tutaonana kesho. Have a good night.